County and Town of Okotoks Intermunicipal Committee meeting of Tuesday, December 2nd.
CEO Vincent,
open.
sorry, I'm
It's my pleasure to call to order the Foothills County and Town of Okotoks Intermunicipal Committee meeting for Tuesday, December 2nd. My name is Elaine Vincent, and I have the pleasure of being the CAO for the Town of Okotoks. I have the pleasure of calling this meeting to order as we have not currently declared the chair and the co-chair for the committee. So at this point in time, I will ask Reeve Seward who the chair and co-chair are from Foothills County, please.
You caught me off guard. Yeah, our council has chosen myself as the chair and Councillor R.D. McHugh as the co-chair.
Thank you, Reeve Seward. Mayor Thorne, who will be your chair and co-chair, please?
I'm the chair, and I believe Councillor Lang is co-chair. No, I'm wrong. It's Councillor Dykma is our co-chair. Perfect. There we go.
Perfect. I'll call for a motion that Reeve Seward from Foothills County and Mayor Thorne from the Town of Okotoks be acknowledged as the co-chairs, and that Councillor McHugh from Foothills County and Councillor Dykma from the Town of Okotoks be acknowledged as the alternate co-chairs of the Intermunicipal Committee. And once that motion is passed, I will turn over the chair to Mayor Thorne. Thank you. That is Councillor Callister from Foothills County moving that motion. We'll call the question.
All in favor?
All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mayor Thorne to resume chair role.
Thank you very much, CEO Vincent. That brings us to the adoption of an agenda. We do have an agenda before us. Committee, is there any changes, additions, deletions? You want to remove whole sections? Okay, I'm seeing none. Somebody want to move to approve that motion? Councillor Lang, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call that question. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Brings us to minutes of the previous meeting that were in our package. Is there any errors, omissions, changes to those? There's only a couple. Well, I guess there's 4 of us still that were on that. Seeing none, somebody want to move?
I'll move to accept to approve the minutes.
Thank you very much, Reeve Seward. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Perfect. Okay, now we get into the fun part of the agenda, the business part. So first item up on our business agenda today is our Foothills Okotoks Regional Water Project update. And I believe I have our water project lead, Leah Schimler. Did I say that right, Leah? Who's going to present on that. So I will turn it over to you, Ms. Schimler.
Oh, thank you. Test. Okay. Thank you for having me today, and welcome to the new councillors. I'm here to provide an update on the Regional Water Project. I do know that there have been many updates, and so I'm going to try to provide some hopefully new information. And so feel free to ask any questions if I don't cover some of the pieces that you'd like. I'm just going to give a little bit of history and context about how we got here, a little brief overview of each of the components, and then an update on the schedule and where we're at. So if you can go to the next slide, thanks. Okay, so this all stemmed in 2012. The Calgary Regional Partnership did a master plan for water servicing of the region, water and wastewater. This led to Okotoks evaluating specifically how water could be brought to Okotoks specifically around there. So it was kind of like a bunch of different options. Treated water from Calgary was looked at, and then their own intake at different locations. Through that work, the council did vote to bring a treated water pipeline from Calgary. A bunch of work was completed on design and grant applications submitted to the province. All of a sudden, 2018, the province pivoted on their mandate with water licenses, and they said that for Calgary to provide servicing, or for anybody to provide servicing to another municipality, they would have to transfer their water license to that municipality. Licenses are a scarce resource in this basin. That was a showstopper for the city of Calgary. So this became an issue that Okotoks was all of a sudden up against, and an alternate approach was needed. So they reached out to Foothills County administration. They worked together. If you could just go to the next slide. And I'm going a bit fast because it's a lot of content. Basically worked together on a sub-regional feasibility study. So they wanted to look at what options were available for a long-term projection of growth and service areas to support sort of this sub-region south of Calgary. And these options included, there was 14 alternatives evaluated. The main goals were maximizing existing infrastructure as much as possible, leaving flexibility for the future because it's hard to predict the future. So coming up with a staged approach that would allow administrations in the future to be able to pivot as development was seen. The goal was providing resiliency and autonomy of water, given the challenges with the province and the city. And then of course, making sure that it was cost effective and responsible fiscally. So a number of options were compared, and actually at the end of the day, when we compared it to the cost to bring water from Calgary, the regional system was recommended. It was more cost effective long-term. It provided autonomy for both municipalities. So we put that in front of council. Council's approved for the concept design. And next slide, that was completed in 2020. This is an old concept. The point of this slide is to say that this was always planned to be a phased approach. We are in phase 1 right now. Phase 2, or stage 2, sorry, is in the future. It hasn't been fleshed out in detail because the intent is to be flexible and optimize as things occur and as information changes. So stage 1, the goals were to maximize existing infrastructure, being Okotoks' water treatment plant. At the time this was done, the Alderside plant was not being constructed, but that has soon been brought into the stage 1 concept. To bring raw water to Okotoks as soon as possible, given the constraints and pressures, and then to give time and space for both municipalities to work through joint servicing areas. And so this is where we are at today. We're building that raw water system to bring water to Okotoks and Alderside, and stage 2 is a future thing that can be evaluated once this is all done. So here we are, project components overview. So the general overview, we have an intake which takes the water from the river, pumps it up through pipeline A, that's the dark blue line there, pumps it up the hill to another pump station that needs to boost the pressure to get it all the way to both Alderside and Okotoks. There's a pump station there, and there's an Okotoks owned reservoir that's not yet in construction. I'll get into the purposes of all of this infrastructure shortly. The midline pump station pumps the water through pipe B down, and then it splits. One pipe C goes to Okotoks, and pipe D obviously will go to Alderside. High level, intake and intake pump station. So a lot of work was done early to establish what the best type of intake would be. There's a lot of complexities, and that is a challenging site. And so it was deemed the best site for licensing reasons. It was going to give you the most flexibility to obtain the most license in the future. But that came with some trickiness. So to select the intake type, which is a horizontal collector well, the drivers were less impact in the river because that takes more approvals and it's more complicated. long-term resiliency against flooding and ice jamming, which is really prevalent at that area. And then obviously capacity. So we wanted to make sure that that long-term large capacity for the investment was going to be secured. So that's the collector well decision. The intake pump station is just built right on top, so it's protected from flooding. Challenges on site, you've probably heard about these already. Essentially, the biggest takeaway here is that they created constraints with mobilizing to site and what equipment we could bring on site and when. And given the time pressures, we wanted to make sure that this could all be done within sort of a year and make sure that we could continue to meet the schedule. The wins were really that early engagement was undertaken with First Nations. It was very collaborative, it was very proactive, it was beyond what was necessary. And so that actually set up both municipalities for navigating the site constraints and the challenges with historical resources quite well. I would say the approvals, so the historical resources and cultural artifacts, that was a risk that was identified early on. The preliminary works showed that that was, potentially, it was always identified as a risk, but it wasn't sort of a big concern until more detailed work got underway, and then it became quite constraining. The biggest win there was Director Hewitt navigating those challenges with the province directly, came up with a phased approach to the approval so that we could continue to see that project move forward without stopping it completely. And so that was a huge win for everybody. And I think it was just a testament to both partners' collaboration and willingness to jump in and find solutions together. The other win is we repurposed one of the pumping wells that was used in the initial testing to prove the concept. That was converted to a well that can be used to bring water to Okotoks in the interim. So despite navigating all of these schedule and approval challenges, we have a means of getting water to the town. And that's going to be on track to be in place in the spring of 2026. So we have that backup, which helps to decouple the schedule risk that's always present. So we can move on. Pipelines. We just put sizes on here to help understand sort of scale. So pipe A is that the short segment from the intake up to the pump station reservoir. It's a large pipe because it's higher pressure, also conveying all of the flow from the intake. And then, so you've got 6 kilometers there approximately. That pipe, schedule-wise, almost complete. So we are complete everything up to the interim well. And then there's a segment of trenchless on the intake site that's going to be done in Q1 of 2026. Then you have pipe B, which brings water from the reservoir down to the junction between where it goes to Okotoks and where it goes to Alderside. 12 kilometers of pipe, that's almost complete, should be done in the next month and a half or so. And then you've got approximately 7 to 8 kilometers of pipe along 370th Ave through North Railway Street, crossing the tracks, crossing the Sheep River, and then to the water treatment plant in Okotoks. And that one's complete except for some minor, just some minor pieces that are in North Railway that are yet to be finished. And then lastly, the Alderside pipe, which is just under 7 kilometers. It runs south along Highway 2, and that provides water to your reservoir down in Alderside. That one, the design is at 60% right now. It's going for pricing very shortly, and then the county can decide if they like the pricing and if they want to move forward with that piece. So really the alignment was an iterative process. The main goal was to reduce cost of installation by looking at the long-term pumping costs. So you're trying to reduce your elevation changes. You're looking at what are the easiest ways to install it so that it's not expensive in tight spaces. How do we minimize resident disturbance or asking for land from them? And so all of that was sort of iterative. We worked with the contractor early, and I'd say that process actually did save quite a bit of money to both municipalities. So overall, it was quite collaborative and I think successful. So yeah, we're almost at the end of that work. Last thing, I mean, you've heard about the challenges. They are not atypical of pipeline installation, so I don't need to get into those, but I would say the win was how we, under the schedule constraint, designing 25 kilometers of pipe was going to take about 1.5 years if you did it from start to finish. Instead, the team was challenged to come up with a much faster, more creative way. And so with that pressure, it was agreed to break up into those segments, and then also within those segments, break it up so that the contractors could get started with finished portions while we worked to design in the next portion. So it was quite a collaborative, dynamic, iterative design process, but it actually allowed us to be finished 6 to 8 months earlier than we would have expected if we would have done it in a logical sequence, A to Z. So I'd say that's a big success. And I've already talked about the schedule, so we can move to the next one. Midline pump station, just a pump station. It serves 2 functions. It pushes water from the top of the hill there down to Okotoks and to Alderside. Initially, we're installing 50% of the capacity because that's sort of what's initially required to carry you for about 5 to 10 years. And then you can install more capacity. There's space in the building later as you need it. It serves 2 functions. It conveys the water and it recirculates water in the reservoir that will be constructed. And that's just to maintain freshness in the event that you have to rely on your reservoir for water if the Bow River has constraints on it and you can't pump from there. The biggest thing here was that there are many pumps. They are optimized for size so that you can operate them as little as you need or as much as you need. And so it's just like a long-term operational maintenance cost was sort of the priority. So it may seem like a lot of pumps, but it's so that you can always operate it with your maximum efficiency no matter what flow you're at. And next, reservoir. This is just a concept sketch that we used at the open house. It's a lot of water. We store 3 months of Okotoks' average day demand for the 25-year build out for the, basically in addition to what you're providing now to your residents. So it's size for about 25,000 people for 3 months of storage. And so normally water will just flow through it, keeping it fresh. But if you ever have to, if there's a drought risk and you can't pump from the Bow River, you have lots of time and you can deplete your reservoir to use that. That also supports, same thing, the Alderside Reservoir as well. So there's lots of flexibility in how this is operated so that both municipalities have that resiliency. It's designed to maintain water quality so that you don't have algae. Algae blooms are a problem. They cause the need for chemicals and all sorts of expensive things. So the design is mitigating that through various means. Last, the winds here are mainly the challenging site. Lots of groundwater. The groundwater is not very deep. So the design was really about optimizing geometry and making sure that we were working with the site grades as much as possible to not hit groundwater during construction and to minimize your costs for trucking soil off-site or on-site to use it for the work. That hasn't started, the reservoir hasn't started construction yet, but it will. The county and the town are working together to figure out the best way to construct it and procure it, and that's going to likely start next year sometime. It's also not critical path for the project to bring water to Okotoks. So, and last one, schedule. Okay, I went really fast. Thank you. This is just a high-level overview of where we started in 2024 on design and where we are today. So we're more than halfway through. This isn't perfectly to scale. December, so we're beginning our intake pump station construction. Our intake is almost complete being constructed. We're working through commissioning. We've got early 2026, we expect to have water flowing to Okotoks, so there will be, the pipelines will all be complete, and then we will finish construction of the pump stations through 2026. And then when the reservoir and pipe D, they are flexible, they're not critical paths, so it's kind of allows you guys lots of flexibility to adapt and build them as needed and kind of take advantage of market conditions and things like that. So the designs are ready to go, but you can have that sort of autonomy to choose when you want to advance those last pieces. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schimler. Questions from committee? I just have one. Is there a requirement from Alberta Environment on the timeline of the construction of the reservoir? Like, do we have anything tied to?
There's a construction approval. It can be amended. So it's actually expiring this year. And so we're working through amending that, and they're usually very receptive. Their amendments and extensions are no issue typically for construction approvals.
Okay, I think where my question is going a little bit more with that is there's a requirement that the reservoir is built. Does Alberta Environment have a deadline as to when the reservoir actually must be built by in terms of
No,
it existing?
it's proactively tied to potential constraints on your licenses.
Okay.
So we know that moving forward, Alberta Environment's placing, we call them conditions on the licenses. So when you transfer them, this is a trend we're seeing now because of the concern on drought. So what they say is any new licenses that are transferred, you're likely going to see conditions put on those licenses, and those conditions would necessitate the reservoir. So it hasn't occurred yet, but that's in anticipation. So and we haven't seen them say that you can't have a transfer before the reservoir is in place, but we obviously can't predict how the regulators change their minds.
Alrighty, thank you. Anybody else? Questions on water? Seeing none. With that, then there's a motion on the potential motion to receive this as information. Would anybody like to move that? Councillor McHugh? Anybody else want a question on that? No, nothing. Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much for the great update. I will now go to item 4.2, which is the provincial ward election boundaries feedback. And I'm going to turn it over to the Town of Okotoks Senior Planner and our Intergovernmental Liaison, Colton Nickel, to present on this item.
Thanks. As per provincial law passed by the legislature in the fall sitting, so in the spring of 2025, the commission was established to review the electoral boundaries, and they have to provide that final report by March 28th of 2026. We received the interim report on October 27th, so we're just looking to provide a submission to the commission on the interim report by December 19th of 2025. Following this, there will be public hearings in January, and the Town of Okotoks is scheduled on January 12th to speak on the town's behalf. We can speak broader as well in regards to preferences for the electoral divisions. Next slide, please. So this is the existing electoral division, of course, encompassing the town, portions of Foothills County, and the town of Diamond Valley. And next slide, please. So just to be clear, the overview and objective of this report is just to present the proposed electoral boundaries and the perspective solely from the town and Foothills County and Diamond Valley and our ability to work effectively with the area MLA. We're looking beyond parties, beyond existing relationships with our current MLA and any potential impacts from politics. We're simply just looking at this from an effective representation standpoint. So when looking at the report, the Commission does acknowledge that Calgary-Okotoks will be controversial based on the feedback received. This is a direct quote from that report. The Commission's view was that it keeps communities of interest in common, has clear boundaries, and reasonably equal populations, and that's why they propose a hybrid electoral division boundary. They also provide a preferred second option, realizing the first may be controversial. In terms of the proposed changes, the biggest one, of course, is adding the city of Calgary to the proposed electoral district. And the rationale in the report is largely about balancing population distribution across other City of Calgary ridings. The rationale doesn't, in the opinion of town administration, come across particularly strong as to the benefits to Okotoks or Foothills County or Diamond Valley. It seems more about fitting the overall puzzle together, so to speak. The commission does acknowledge their skepticism of hybrid electoral divisions, and they did note that they received no feedback from the public that supported the creation of a Calgary Okotoks hybrid electoral division. So they are especially curious for feedback. So that's where we are hopeful that a letter may actually have some bigger impact than other changes. A bit of background. So as noted, the commission was required to divide Alberta into 89 proposed electoral divisions. The main focus is on effective representation as guaranteed by the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So they look at sparsity, density, and rate of growth, grouping together communities of interest, geographical features, looking at communication and transportation, and then making sure there's understandable and clear boundaries. They make very clear that we don't follow the United States approach of one person, one vote, where you see the gerrymandered districts that kind of work to just the really odd shapes to just fit certain numbers of population within a riding. That's not how we do it here in Canada or how any of the provinces do it. So this really explains how effective representation is that core goal of the commission. So when looking at our considerations and how we want to try to present this to the commission, I think explaining there's a significant number of region-specific important capital projects that Town Council, Foothills County Council work closely with our MLA to advance through provincial funding and advocacy, with examples including the water pipeline, the interchange and infrastructure grants. There's also a lot of joint funding and coordination and advocacy on other key projects. And the town of Diamond Valley is also within the existing electoral district, and there's plenty of shared services and community connections with them as a municipality. Overall, the existing electoral district incorporates individuals and families who utilize the same area school districts, rec centers and programs, attend similar geographical community events, and rely on similar key pieces of infrastructure. There may have been a bit of a disconnect in understanding how South Calgary really has everything they need kind of within that city boundary. Their school divisions, their rec hockey, for example, it's all combined within that City of Calgary, whereas we're looking beyond municipal boundaries and taking a much more of a regional focus in terms of how we look at community here. So here's proposed option 1 for the revised boundaries, and it's referred to as Calgary Okotoks in the report. It includes the southwest portion of Calgary, south of Highway 201 and west of McLeod Trail, and it includes a large number of new communities there. There's probably even more sprouted out since I wrote this. Its name could go on there. It's got a population of 58,327, so that's a 6% variance from the provincial average in the report. The kind of key thing to keep in mind here, which I'll get to a bit later on, is questioning whether the report truly looked at the growth rates of the different areas. Is this area, if we're already exceeding that provincial average, in just a few years, given all the growth planned within Okotoks, Foothills, and the city, will this be dramatically redrawn in the next commission? So there's potential challenges. So while adding City of Calgary balances population, it introduces an area with very different funding priorities and is potentially less connected to Okotoks and Foothills County from a representation standpoint. The report does a really good job explaining the challenges rural MLAs already have to attend events and listen to citizens. And as noted, 3 fast-growing municipalities will need revised significantly. The area within the city portion is already rapidly building out, so it would likely have the population to meet its own district potentially at the time of the next review. Just briefly broke down all the area structure plans approved within the portion of the City of Calgary, and they're all approved for up to 64,000 people. You can already see how much it's built out from the Google kind of aerial visual there. So this area will probably hit that 64,000 in the next 10 to 15 years. And keep in mind, an average electoral district's about 55,000. So it'll be large enough for its own pretty quickly here. Option 2 includes Town of Diamond Valley, Okotoks, and then the more rural and urban portions of Foothills County. The commission notes they reluctantly proposed this. It does have a population that's larger than that, around 55,000 person average. So it is a larger variance than option 1. That said, it does likely bring together communities definitely of more common interest than the first option. there's the benefits, potentially more shared connections, that history of advocacy, and it may stay intact for longer, although it would have to change a bit because it's already on that upper edge. Next slide, please. So now bringing forward the options that were discussed between the mayor and Reeve on Friday between the town, and so just kind of maybe some options between the town and the county that we could then bring forward to Diamond Valley as well. So this is option 1, encompassing Okotoks, Diamond Valley, and kind of key portions of Foothills County. It extends a bit more to the northwest than the existing Highwood electoral boundary, which you see in the kind of thick blue line here. So this is the first option that could be considered by the Intermunicipal Committee. And then we'll go to the second option. So yeah, and then the second option here would add the hatched blue area as well. So it would be option 1 plus adding the hatched area of option 2 in. It follows kind of key geographical boundaries, roadways, that type of thing as well. So these could be provided as an attachment to our overall letter to the commission, just illustrating kind of building on our key points of communities of interest and areas of interest coming together in one electoral division. So the 2 items for consideration are the proposed maps, and there is a draft letter as well. We have revised the draft letter from the one that's in your package to make it much more concise and shorter, something I'm not great at usually, but we've cut it down and added an attachment with all the jargon onto it. So it's hopefully a little more streamlined and concise. And so just in terms of next steps, and of course, these are all flexible pending IMC. But if IMC supports, we could send the draft letter to Diamond Valley. Their council's meeting tomorrow, so they could walk it onto their agenda. And then the draft letter and proposed preferred map could go to Okotoks Council on December 8th, and then Foothills Council December 10th. And then we could send that letter to the Boundaries Commission prior to the December 19th deadline. And then, as I noted, on January 12th, the town of Okotoks is registered to speak before the commission on the proposed changes. And I think we have 6 minutes to speak there. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Can you just bring up the map, yeah, those, probably the option 1 and 2, yeah, just so we have those. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Nickel? Councillor Callister.
What's the population difference between option 1 and option 2?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have that exact data. Like, I'd have to get the numbers from Foothills County. I mean, we have the rough, Okotoks is about, say, 35,000, Diamond Valley about the 5,000 range. So we'd have to kind of look at breaking out those population. But our view was to kind of present the general principles of what we see in terms of the electoral districts and then leave it with the commission to kind of look into that. The report notes that you can have a range of kind of up to 25% of a variance from that main average, depending on a number of factors. And looking at those range of factors, a larger variance could be argued either way.
To add on to that, does this population in say option 1, does it include the new ASPs in Division 6?
The Alderside?
No, Heritage Point.
Oh, Heritage Point, yeah. Through the chair,
Serenity.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it includes all that?
Yeah, Heritage Point, all that is included in there.
All right, thank you.
Reeve Seward.
Thank you. Can you just back up a couple? You had a blue section on one of your maps. No, I think it was just like
Next
the one just before this one.
There we go.
Yeah. So I guess if I understand this correctly, the dark blue line on the far east, that's the county line, correct? The Vulcan versus Foothills?
Yeah, you'll see the county line and then the existing, it also, which lines up with the existing electoral boundary for Highwood, that thick blue.
Okay, so on this map, so we have the dark, or the blue hashed area, and then 6 miles or whatever it is, east is the dark line. So is that, in the options being proposed, is that in the High River Vulcan riding?
Yeah, it looks like it would be in Livingston, the Cloud, which includes High River. because then Cardston Siksika is more to the east.
I don't think Livingston McLeod goes that far north. I guess my point is, any of that I would want to be in the same riding. If we're going to suggest anything, I'd want it to be, make sure that it's in the same riding as High River Vulcan, as opposed to whatever Chestermere or Strathmore is. I think it's more fitting. The other piece for Foothills, when we look at the far southwest corner, in the proposals, there's a section there that is proposed to be part of the Banff Jasper riding. A very odd thing, because it's proposed a section there and a section of the far northeast, so it kind of, or northwest, so it kind of circles around up there. So I do like this drawing by having that northwest as part of Highwood, getting rid of Calgary, but having that Banff Jasper riding circle around and catch part of the southwest corner of Foothills is just insane in my mind. We just have nothing in common. I mean, those residents just have nothing in common with Banff and Jasper. But I think that's I would expect to be an easy thing from a provincial standpoint, because the population is very low in that neck of the woods. So I guess I'm saying all this. I do like the work that you guys have done to get rid of that Calgary section, change the drawings a little bit. But I think for Foothills, it's a little bit broader of a piece, because there's more than just this one riding.
Any other questions? Councillor Dick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question. Do we have any idea? I recognize the next review will be in 8 years or so. Do we have an idea what our projected population will be in this area, given that it's a fairly high growth area?
Through the chair, we don't have regional population projections. That is something that we definitely want to kind of look at exploring and building out more as the IMC progresses. But at this time, we don't have those across the entire area. We could do some work on that, but there's nothing at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor McHugh.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is just a proposed map, or this is what was decided to be option 1 and option 2 going forwards here?
I think the intent of this is it's proposed.
Okay.
Is there somewhere that committee feels we should be bringing forward that we could do a joint submission on? If
Sure.
we can't come to an agreement on a joint submission, then so ultimately we're trying to determine if we can agree on a map that we could do a joint submission on,
Sure.
or if we're going to each do our own thing.
Okay. So I would just echo Councillor Seward's comments. It's add back in the rest of Foothills to option number 2 on the east side. I can't imagine why you would drop that out. And then the inclusion of the northwest corner it's going to be few, it's not going to be a lot of residents, but it helps balance out the equation. So if we've got Okotoks at 30,000, Diamond Valley at 5,000, that's 35. We're kind of splitting the municipality. I think the majority of our population is in the north end, so that's got to be very close to 50,000. I just offering that up as the inclusion, dropping the city of Calgary, including the northwest corner, should get us pretty close to your variance level, would be my thoughts. And yes, of course, then that makes us all the reasons that, they've already acknowledged that there's a difference, and I can't see how Silvertip's going to fit in with the rest of what is proposed here. I can't even see how I don't think the MLA would want that. I don't know how they're going to be able to focus. You're going to be concentrating on rural and town life, and then also having to intermingle with the city of Calgary. Whole different ball of wax. So I guess I'm just trying to add some supporting rationale, but I think that you have it all very well covered already. Thanks.
Yeah, just to read Seward's comment of earlier of the eastern boundary that's not blue hash that's currently in the high road there, that would become, or that is currently proposed to be in the High River Vulcan riding. So basically what we've got is highlighted in the blue hash would also be part, if I read this map correctly, of that High River Vulcan riding.
Can we go to
That's
the proposed map? If we go up to the Calgary Okotoks, keep going up. Option 1. Go up a little bit more to Calgary Okotoks just to show what's.
Yeah, it doesn't really show the High River Vulcan. Yeah, so everything from 272 east is in High River Vulcan. In that new riding for High River Vulcan is what's proposed in the commission's report. Because that riding now goes up 272, it goes around Strathmore, and it goes north of Rocky Ford is the new High River Vulcan riding that's been proposed. If that makes sense. Councillor McHugh.
Makes zero sense. Makes
Well,
zero sense to pull Foothills, 2 townships out of Foothills and throw them into Vulcan. Like, that's just absolute insanity. Where is the cutoff? It's still
What's-
272. What's the, Percival's live on what? What's the street boundary for Foothills Vulcan?
Sorry, I've got it on.
I think we're just waiting for Ms. Storch to bring it up. The electoral map, is that what we're trying to bring up? Yeah,
broader
is the
one.
actual electoral report map. So what I'm seeing on this is that, and I've got it on my computer, but it doesn't really show what the old Highwood boundary was. So the High River boundary goes, where is Okotoks on this map? Yeah, like they've got the whole south part. So they actually, yeah, that's there, that one. But this doesn't, the High River Vulcan, this is different map than the High River. Like the High River Vulcan actually goes up, according to the report I'm looking at. Like that might be the south half of it, but according, yeah.
This is option B.
Like in the actual report, I'm on, if you're looking at the electoral report, I'm in page 180 of the interim electoral report, which is the High River Vulcan riding. Yeah, I don't know if it's an attached.
It was attached to this. If we go to the,
Oh, in that.
go to
that's
the
wrong
next
agenda.
item.
Next, you need to go to the next, that's the wrong agenda. Like the wrong agenda item, sorry.
Next one. Yeah.
So the
First
interim, the very first attachment. So if you go to page 180 of that attachment, that report. This is what they show as the High River Vulcan riding.
And is that option A or option B? That must be option A.
Is there 2 options for High River Vulcan? I didn't know there was 2 options for High
This-
River
So
Vulcan.
there's not.
They didn't propose an alternate. The Calgary Okotoks, so of the versions, Calgary Okotoks is rare in that it had an alternate provided. That was not common across the province.
So I'm just looking at, so High River Vulcan, it goes west of Okotoks and wraps around and goes north. Am I reading that right?
Correct.
Because I thought I saw a map just a minute ago where it didn't go north.
I think the map that was showing you before was just showing what was in the Foothills County part. Because what goes north isn't in Foothills County. Like this stuff up here is not part of it. I think the map that you saw earlier was just showing what your ridings would be for Foothills County. Does that make sense? Not the actual boundary electoral, just how many electoral divisions Foothills County would be comprised of, I believe is what the map was that came up earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is what the current electoral boundaries are for Foothills County. And if we go to proposed A, this would be what is going to happen with proposed A, and then proposed B, if we go with the option, like our proposed option, it's would look like that. But that doesn't mean the High River Vulcan would end right where it does. High River Vulcan still extends. It's just showing it for the Foothills County portion of your boundary. Does that make sense?
And through the chair, for the purposes of this discussion, just given that we're dealing with the one riding and the one MLA, you may want to look at the joint letter with us and then consider your own letter on your own for the rest. You guys have a lot more going on than we do on this front, so it might require a bit more.
So I get the question before us today is signing on to this letter jointly. So I guess I'm just struggling with how we would do that because Foothills has a lot more involved here. And I would expect we may want to write our own letter as opposed to joining on one because it is a lot more involved.
Guess I'm going to ask to admin, is there any reason that, because I think the same principles of what we're trying to achieve on the joint letter would also be principles that would be, I think Foothills County probably would want to achieve as well for themselves. Is there any risk of us doing a joint and Foothills County sending their own, or I guess I'm just kind of looking for direction of where we want to go, because I think Reef Seawart's exactly right. There's a lot kind of going on in Foothills County. At least you don't have 4 different ridings yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Thorne. I'll ask CAO Payne certainly to step in. I think there's absolute commonalities that we agree on, and we don't want to submit a proposal that's different from the town and Foothills County. So agreeing that that upper quadrant there that's in the Banff Jasper should belong in the Okotoks Diamond Valley. If we can agree to that, that letter coming from both of our parties could agree to that. And then Foothills County substantiates the different requirements that they have. I just don't want to submit a letter from Okotoks Diamond Valley about going into Foothills County territory without having Foothills County agreement. I think that's overstepping our boundaries, but I think it aligns because it lets us take Calgary out, put that in with the agreement of our partner, and then you substantiate that. So we could be part of your letter, and then you go through and do what you need to do, or we send 2 letters. Either way works.
So, I'm not sure which map. I think it's the untitled one, or CAO Payne, sorry, do you want to provide a comment? No, you're good. I think it's the untitled attachment. Nope. The one that shows option A or B for what we want to do. It's probably only in the presentation.
PowerPoint.
It's in the PowerPoint. Yeah. So I guess, from committee's perspective, is option 1 or is option 2 our preference for what we would want to create as the new Okotoks Foothills County riding? Or whatever aptly named it is. Councillor Payne, CAO Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to suggest what I was hearing was maybe an option 3 that expanded the option 2 boundary to the very east side of Foothills County's current jurisdictional boundary to align with really municipal boundaries. However, just to answer the first part of the question, in the recommended motion, It's recommended that the councils will take this back to individual councils for a further discussion. And I would just suggest to Foothills County councillors that is probably a discussion we should have about whether Foothills County should join Diamond Valley and Okotoks in a joint letter, and then also submit a secondary letter directly from Foothills County, just identifying our concerns, especially with the new boundary of Banff Jasper, including the northwest corner and the southwest corner. If you bring up, Janice, that other drawing, I think from the discussion, it sounds like the municipalities are fairly aligned with that sort of philosophically in option 3. That would have the north part of the county, including Diamond Valley and Okotoks, as one riding, and then you'd have the future High River Vulcan riding as a separate one, without that very northeast piece east of 272 Street East being included. And then I think certainly we need to write a separate letter regarding Banff Jasper, because I can't for the I can't think of how that area has any commonality with Jasper. That whole sort of, it's a line. Now I understand Kananaskis ID is directly to the west of the boundary you can see on the screen there. So K Country is certainly in that riding, but not sure how that southwest portion has anything in common. But just to summarize it, if the committee supports the recommendation, I guess from a staff point of view, we just need clarity on what the joint riding boundary might look like for the Okotoks Diamond Valley area.
All righty, clear as mud. So where do we want to go from here? Councillor, or Reeve Seward, I will get it right yet.
I can give you a motion. Because we're not making the final decision today. I think our council needs to have a fulsome discussion on this. So I would give you a motion a little bit different than what's worded here, that the respective councils of the IMC consider a motion to send a joint letter to the province on behalf of Foothills and Okotoks requesting boundary changes to the proposed electoral divisions.
Just wait for Ms. Storch to see that she's got that. We can do that as a separate motion, I think. Yeah.
What I captured was that Reeve Seward is proposing a motion that respective councils of the IMC consider a motion to send a letter to the province on behalf of Foothills County and Town of Okotoks regarding realignment of provincial boundaries as discussed. But I don't know which option you want to, or are we going to do that in another motion?
Yeah. Do we want to give an option, like the option 1, option 2, or right? CAO Payne said that option 3, or do we want to just say we want to?
I was thinking the option 3.
Okay.
So.
So option 3 is extending to the Highwood boundary, current east boundary. Okay. Speaking to your motion. Is everybody, first of all, clear to the motion that's on the table? Yeah. Just speak to your motion.
No, nothing much else to say. I think we already said it. Just that we consider and see where we end up after we have that discussion in council.
Okay, anybody else wish to speak to that? Councillor McHugh and then Councillor Degman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in speaking to the motion and just food for fodder, but these electoral, what do we call these outfits?
Electoral divisions?
Well, who's the Electoral Commission? I think it's important that the Electoral Commission have a little bit of consideration for how the municipal boundaries are drawn. As bad as ours is, well, as bad as what is proposed, in my opinion, when I look at High River Vulcan, that is obscene. That is that is crossing a major geographical river, is crossing the Bow River. It has Foothills, Wheatland, and Vulcan included, which is absurd. Like, man, I want some of those drugs, man. Like, I don't even know how you draw that up. But the comment is there has to be some sort of consideration for the municipalities and their boundaries to keep some autonomy in this situation. Just strictly doing it on population doesn't work. And I would just echo the comments of CO Payne, the southwest corner of Banff Jasper. Like, this is impossible. These are logistical nightmares for any MLA. How are you going to be in Banff Canmore and then have to swing all the way down to the southwest corner? Like, I guess if we're going to start paying for helicopters, but otherwise it's a long ways around. If it's winter, you're not just driving straight through to get down there. So just more comments for administration on the ridiculousness of what's been drawn here. It just cannot be solely based on population distribution. There has to be some consideration for local government levels and what our boundaries are as well. Thanks.
Councillor Techman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I would just say from an Okotoks perspective, I think one of the biggest keys with this is just making sure that we I don't want to say take Calgary out of it, but we're really making sure that the representation is representative of our community, both in terms of Foothills County and Okotoks. And I think it's important that as we go back to our respective councils, just making sure that is, I would say for us, priority one, but obviously for your council, having some robust conversations in terms of the broader nuances to some of these proposed amendments would be good. But I think it's good. It would be really good for us to really focus on making sure that Calgary isn't part of this new riding, because I think that unto itself is going to create some pretty significant challenges for us.
And I think around Foothills, that's priority two, right? That's just how they come up with the idea of having Calgary as part of this riding is just insane.
Okay, I think that is there, I guess what question I have for admin is, is there a way we could at least get a high level population estimate of what does that make for the population of that proposed riding with option 3 in there, just so we have an idea of, where I'm thinking of our arguments are based on the proposed ASPs, that makes that other riding too big. I think we need to look at it, this new riding with what is proposed ASPs in there and what does that do to population as well. Just to make sure that we're consistent in what our arguments of why we want out of one, but we're going to create one that is potentially got some ASPs in it as well that show that growth, or at least the ability for us to give the justification of why it's different. I think will be an important piece on that. So is there ability for us to at least get a ballparkish idea on population? I'm seeing nods from the CAO table and from
through the chair. Diamond Valley, Okotoks is easy. I can work with Foothills County GIS, and I think we could get a rough population estimate of the two areas and add it together and come back with that.
Okay, great, thank you. With that, any other questions? Anything else? So calling that question, then, all in favor? Carries unanimously. Does somebody want to make the motion to send a draft letter as presented, as is redrafted? I know it's different than what's in our package, but that we do a draft letter with Diamond Valley. Does that make sense based on what we're going to do? I'm seeing a nod from the CAO table. So does anybody want to make? Councillor Lang?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Anybody questions on that or comments? Reeve Seabird.
So that would, so I'm just looking at the proposed motion here. So that motion we would take out as presented because we're drafting a different letter.
Yeah. Okay. You got that, Ms. Starch? Yeah. Okay. Did you have a question? Sorry. Councillor McGee? Yeah, we just took out the as presented. We confirmed that that was what was the intended. And that it's just the draft letter be sent to the Town of Diamond Valley Council for consideration of signing on to the joint letter. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, calling that question, all in favor? That carries unanimously. Excellent. Okay. Our IMC meeting is full with a bunch of provincial issues. Provincial survey on the divided highway speed limits, and I have Director Jeff Green is going to present on this.
Oops. There we go. Thank you, Your Worship, members of the Intermunicipal Committee. My name is Jeff Green. I'm the Director of Community Growth and Identity for the town of Okotoks. I am not James Cameron, who wrote the report. Mr. Cameron is indisposed elsewhere, so I will be pinch hitting for him. The report that's included in your package, and as well as the attachments, which made your package rather large, is basically a history of studies and efforts that have been done with respect to Highway 2 and 306, 338, and 370th intersections. There has been many studies done on trying to find ways to improve safety of those intersections over time. And the information that's included in the reports has a list of safety recommendations that could be implemented, some of which have been implemented by the province. What we are here to speak to you about today is the provincial survey request looking at changing Highway 2 speed limits from 110 to 120 kilometers an hour. And what we wanted to do is bring that information to the Intermunicipal Committee to address that specific segment of Highway 2 and see what the perspective of the two councils is on that question of increasing speed. From those reports, you'll be able to pull some interesting data out of them. About 70 to 90% of the collisions that occur at those three intersections are caused by left turns and through movements. You'll also read in that report that it's either T-bones or rear end situations that have caused a number of the collisions at those three intersections. There's a fair amount of detail in the reports that talks about recommendations to actually close all three medians, and that has been come through on a number of the different reports. That has not been put into play at this point from the province for a number of reasons, one of which I believe is being able to ensure that there's still alternative access across Highway 2 between the county and the town in this particular case. I would note that the proposal or one of the recommendations in one of the reports to Alberta Transportation and Economic Corridors was actually lowering the speed limit on this segment of Highway 2 to 80 to 90 kilometers, or potentially introducing variable speed signage, which has been done in some jurisdictions where, depending on high volume circumstances, the speed would be lowered from 110 to 80. So the essence of what we wanted to just put in front of the councils was that in that particular segment of Highway 2, increasing the speed from 110 to 120 is actually contrary to most of the recommendations that have come through these studies, and in terms of putting safety measures into play. So it is the perspective of administration that we should be responding to the survey to the province, not disputing the change of speed limits elsewhere on Highway 2, but that in this particular segment, until such time as there is the full measure of safety introduced, which would be the interchange, which is currently on the budget, that, that we don't recommend that the speed limits be increased at this, on this portion of the highway. That is in essence, the question before you today and what we are recommending to.
Thank you very much, Director Green. Committee, any questions or comments or concerns on this? Reeves Seward.
I feel like I'm talking too much today. Foothills County did make a motion, and we are already sending a letter to Alberta Transportation of non-support for increasing the speed limits. We are quite concerned about the proposed change. Changing the speed limit from 110 to 120 is changing the effective speed from 120 to 130. So it's not that we're just catching up with the actual speed limit, we're just increasing the effective speed. I mean, you hit it bang on in terms of 338 and those three intersections there. They're just not safe for increasing speed limit or effective speed, either way. The other piece I would add from a Foothills perspective, when you get south a little farther, there's those cable guardrails along quite a stretch from Danton right to High River and a little bit farther north High River. If the roads were built for a higher speed, those guardrails would stay intact fairly well. The reality is they build them up and a week later they're torn down, and it's just a revolving cycle of fixing guardrails, which tells you that the speed limit is or the roads are not designed for the travel that is happening there. So all that to say, Foothills County has already taken a position, and we are sending a letter. So, thanks.
So if Foothills County's already sent a letter, then we probably don't need a motion coming out of IMC. Is that correct? And then we can just deal with it at Okotoks, or should there be a joint letter as well that we send? Or because we could do a joint letter as well, either way. Anybody have any suggestions? Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Difference between a rural municipality and an urban municipality. We cover a lot more ground. Anyway, be happy to do a joint letter. And the only thing I would add to this joint letter is something to do with improvements at the 552. And that's where there's another bad pinch point, and that's where you have the majority of your traffic coming off 2A onto 2, and it's terrifying as is trying to make the big merge coming over the top of the hill and the break in the traffic. It just speaks to the problem with the speeds and concur with everything that's in this report. But I would just look to add with the intersections on Highway 2 at 306, 338, 370th, and the 552 overpass as well. Thanks.
Just a question on the letter that you guys have sent. Did you recommend no speed changes for everything pretty much on Highway 2 south of Calgary that comes through Foothills County?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just to address that, we have the motion was made last week, so we haven't seen the draft from administration as yet, but our suggestion was that no speed changes until such conditions are met. And one of them was 3 lanes. Like if you don't have 3 lanes, 120 doesn't work. Acknowledge the speed concern. You go from 110 to 120, you're really going to 140. And I'm basically just addressing all the deficits in the transportation network before it could proceed.
Okay, great.
Officially, we don't have the letter as yet.
Yeah, no, that just trying to get ultimately, you're not saying just in this section is what I think I'm hearing is you're saying everything that comes through Foothills County, we do not agree with the change at all. Okay, just checking that was what there is. Anybody else have any questions on this? Okay, with that, do we want to put a joint letter together or just send our own separate? Because we'll be sending one as well. Councillor Lang.
I think A joint letter and then individual letters from each council holds more, because then it shows that, yes, we've talked about this. This is a concern for both municipalities, and it just gives another voice in the situation.
Could we, I'm not sure about process, but could we actually send a letter that actually just came from the IMC committee? And then we send a letter from Foothills County and we send one from the town of Okotoks, but here's from the actual intermunicipal committee. Could we do that just from a governance perspective? I like making it complicated for them.
So here from a governance perspective could be the challenge. Are you speaking for council? Because if your council hasn't voted on it, do you have the authority to indicate yes or no? And so that's always been the challenge, why the IMC recommends to council and then council holds the authority to vote.
Okay, yeah, valid point. So, okay, so Councillor Lang, I heard, was potentially looking to maybe put a motion for a joint letter on the floor. Okay, and then we can just decide what we want to do with that. So would you like to speak to that motion? I think you did, but I'll let you speak again. No, okay. Anybody else? I personally like the joint letter piece because I sometimes feel that there's a appetite to divide and conquer us. So I do like and we have also talked about this and we are fully in alignment for these reasons. So I would be supportive of sending a joint letter as well. Anybody else? Seeing none. Would you like to close, Councillor Lang? With that, then I'll call the question on the motion. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Okay, moving right along. Champion Park. And I've got Foothills County's Park and Recreation Manager, Jeff Porter, to present.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, congratulations and that to the town of Okotoks and that members in attendance and that on your election victories, and look forward to working with you in that in the years to come. So Champion Park, I just wanted to give an update, and I'd like to also add that unfortunately Krista Mihalik, my partner in that from town of Okotoks, is not here, and wish her a speedy recovery. So with Champion Park and that, I also have some unfortunate news to pass on if nobody has heard yet. Mr. Gerald Knowlton passed away November 13th. And for those of you that don't know who Mr. Knowlton was the individual that donated Champion Park to the town of Okotoks in Foothills County. So pass on our condolences to the family. We're also looking in that for IMC today to just give us a thumbs up or thumbs down in regards to the contract that we present annually for the last 9 years, going on potentially 10 years, to the contractor Abaco, which is Dave and Robin Cockrell. They've been caretakers under Mr. Knowlton, and then when the park was donated to Foothills and Okotoks in 2016, they've remained as caretakers, and they can contain a lot of historical knowledge in regards to the park and the equipment, and the knowledge of individuals in that in the extended community that can operate and maintain this equipment, being so specialized as it is. So we would look for a thumbs up or thumbs down if IMC's fine with us presenting that contract. It's the same contract that's been presented to them for the last 10 years. And we have not had any financial increase in that over the last 4 years in regards to this contract. So just looking for a thumbs up or thumbs down on that. Also, on that, we've done a lot of site maintenance and that over the last year in regards to, we've put new roofing on the station house as well as the section house at the park. And there's been some difficulty in obtaining stencils for the train cars. There's a specific script that needs to be put on the cars, and there seems to be none in existence. We've talked with CP Rail and everybody. So our caretakers in that have begun the arduous process of developing these stencils themselves. So in the future, when the cars need to be painted, and that we'll be able to have those appropriate stencils and that for the cars. As well as that, record keeping has been taking place and archiving, and that, as well as maintaining a list of key contacts, as numerous individuals that have been involved with the park and that are elderly now and moving on or passing on. So as well, and that we are finding a limited specialized equipment knowledge pool has been severely depleted. And we're looking towards how we, bridge that gap between the loss of that knowledge and ability to maintain and move equipment. So, and that's all I had for IMC this morning. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions from committee? Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Porter, for the report. The group that takes care of it, they still want to continue on.
Through the chair to the floor. Unfortunately, in that we disbanded in that the Friends of Champion Park years ago, not years ago, but a couple of years ago. And what we have is those individuals that were involved with the park are still some of our key contacts and knowledge keepers for the equipment and operation and maintenance of the park. We run into some issues in that in regards to insurance, in regards to those people coming to the park and working on the equipment as such. So we've been trying to find workarounds and how to deal with that. But there is some interest still to be involved with the park going forward.
Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the CAOs. Do we have the ability to just give the thumbs up for a contractor, or does that have to go back to our respective councils for budget discussions?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry.
There was an agreement that was brought to Intermunicipal Committee probably a year and a bit ago, operating agreement. And actually, from a governance perspective, that agreement was signed by both of the councils, and it delegated the authority to the IMC to deal with the management of Champion Park. So this is the correct place, certainly, for that type of decision to be made.
Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick follow-up to the chair to Mr. Porter. Are we currently renting out the accommodations, or is the station house vacant? Just looking for an update on that.
Through the chair to the floor. Currently, the station house is not occupied in that by the caretakers. Their caretakers purchased an acreage earlier on this year and moved out to their acreage. So we looked at having new occupancy, and there are many code violations that would have to be brought up to spec in regards to occupancy. So that is why it is unoccupied. We do have passive security in that at the site, and is also monitored by a security company in response to any calls that would go out from those security measures.
Any other questions?
And the contract for the caretakers, it'll be a 1-year contract, or what are we talking there?
Through the chair of the floor, yes, it is an annual contract. We don't do a multiple year contract. It's annum per annum.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through the chair to administration. So do we have what does our go forwards look like here to potentially rent that space out, or just in my view, like, it is kind of important to have someone there so that it doesn't fall apart. Security is great, but it's not the same as having someone on site. So I guess what would be the process if the two councils were to look at trying to generate some revenue out of that space? Or you're just saying that the code violations are so much that are there any other possibilities for renting out that space out?
Through the chair to the floor, that is a loaded question. In my humble opinion, talking with our safety codes people and with my colleague from town of Okotoks, fiscally, I don't think it would be desirable for either council to want to tackle having that site occupied. Plus, we're on a potential timeline that park, its lifespan due to the overpass, whether that's something the councils would want to inject cash into, and then ultimately, who knows what happens with it. So I guess that's probably the best answer I could give. I guess from a financial sense, and that there's structural issues that would have to be changed within it. Stairs aren't up to code, electrical, all sorts of multiple issues.
Is there, I guess, a plan to meet with Alberta Transportation, I think it is, in terms of trajectory on the 338 interchange, impact to Champion Park, and what that transition would be? I'm just wondering, before we get into the potential additional revenue or additional expenses at Champion Park, where are we long-term going with Champion Park? So that's got to be a conversation, I think, with Alberta Transportation and obviously probably with the Knowlton family, with regards to our agreement with the Knowlton family. So just maybe administration or CAOs of kind of some next steps with Champion Park, and recognizing that the question to us here is the one-year operating agreement with the site operators at the moment. So, but I'm just looking for a bigger picture perspective.
Through the chair to the floor, I'll take a stab at this. So CAO Payne and myself held a meeting with Alberta Transportation at the beginning of September, and timelines were given on the proposed construction of 338 and options from a timing perspective in relation to Champion Park. There were proposals that were to be submitted here by the end of November that we need to regroup on to determine the exact timing and ability for the province to advance 338. Critical in this is if the proposed timing can still be fiscally funded by the province. So 338 is currently planned for 2028, 2029, and they do not have an approved budget yet. We know that the land acquisition from the province has occurred. So we're trying to determine and get certainty on that timing so we could make a recommendation about short-term investment versus long-term and that payback period, so that you would actually have information to make an informed decision on. Currently, we don't have enough information, and continue to work on the options and the timing to present actual information to you. I think that there's additional options that will be considered due to changing circumstances that CAO Payne and myself will try to work with the province on to see how we can advance that.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anybody like to, there's a motion in our package that is not probably the motion we need. Would anybody like to make a motion that we approve the 1-year operating agreement with Abaco for this next year? Councillor McHugh, would you like to speak to that?
So moved and nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call that question. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Okay, and I'm going to use chair privilege and we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at, we'll say it's 2:30, but it might be closer to 2:35, but we're going to say it's 2:30. 4.5, I feel like this is the longest IMC agenda we've had in a long time. The Master Shared Services Agreement presentation, and I am going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Catherine Van Kempema. Close, it was close. Van Kempema.
Thank you.
There, I'm getting better.
Good afternoon, members of the Intermunicipal Committee. My name's Catherine Van Kempema. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the town of Okotoks. My colleague is Reginald Hammond, and he's right there in the audience in case there's any questions from the Foothills County perspective that I can't answer from the town of Okotoks perspective. Next. So a year ago, the Intermunicipal Committee, it just doesn't seem like a year ago, but it was a year ago that the Intermunicipal Committee passed a motion to bring back a joint comprehensive overview of the current Master Shared Services Agreement and provide its history as well as the associated processes with it. So this presentation will provide or speak to that, hopefully satisfy that motion, and will provide you an overview to help orientate both the new members of the committee as well as those who are returning. Work on the agreement began in 2010 with the hiring of a gentleman called by the name of Harold Johnsrud, and he was hired to lead a working group to establish first the principles that would guide the development of the agreement, and then determine which services would be considered, ending in an agreement that both the town of Okotoks and Foothills County could agree to. In December of 2011, the first agreement was adopted with separate fire services agreement individually. In 2013, updates were made to the agreement to remove the joint planning agreement, as well as to include 3 new recreation and fire facilities that weren't in the agreement before. 5 years later, as required under the agreement, as it does require a review every 5 years, a review was undertaken, and again, Harold Johnsrud was brought in to lead that. The principles remained unchanged, but a new agreement was developed. And this followed by its adoption in late 2018, which then included the fire services agreement as part of the Master Shared Services Agreement. 5 years later, in 2023, a review was undertaken and no changes were made. So the principles developed actually set the ground rules and provided the basis and the guidance for the work that was to come ahead. These principles have stood the test of time. They remained unchanged in 2018. There were no changes made in 2013, and they're still applicable today. They include respect and mutual understanding of growth and development aspirations and interests, of different capabilities and points of view, and the need to live within the capacity or the capability of the landscape. It also included an agreement to look for fair and equitable and mutually beneficial solutions and ensure communication was mutually supportive. Included services were recreation, library, recycling, cemetery, and fire services. And there's a great big long laundry list of all the services that were looked at, but it was these 5 who are within the agreement. Well, the other ones aren't in the agreement. Some of them have separate agreements that apply. And then there are some general agreements as far as trying to work together, be collaborative, apply the principles to our interactions with those other services as well. The agreement includes, for those 5 different services, clear cost-sharing calculations and provisions. So the excluded services, there's the big long laundry list. So I won't read them out to you, but just as I had said, there are maybe other agreements that govern them that did not form part of this review. This review and presentation deals strictly with the Master Shared Services Agreement. So the general provisions cover cost sharing calculations and payments. So there's things that are overarching, and phasing into provisions for new services and facilities is one of them, as well as a review and amendment and termination provisions are also included in the agreement. There's a 25%, you bill 25% quarterly through the year, and then there is a true up for actual costs shortly after the end of the year. So the first area, next slide, that's covered is fire services. It lays out the costs that are included in the cost sharing calculation, including amortization, and costs are shared based upon population. So the population is used to develop a ratio. The ratio is applied to the included costs, and included in there, next slide, in Schedule B is a quite detailed template that lists individually each operating cost that is included in the calculation. If you're interested or are trying to fall asleep one night, you may want to take a look at the templates in the back of that schedule. Specifically excluded is 911 dispatch as well as highway emergencies. Grants, if it's specific to fire, it's included in the calculation. It nets off of the costs that are included. But if it's a general grant, for example, LGFF or some other general grant that could be applied anywhere, but what just happened to be applied to fire services, that's not included in the calculation. So for the library, the costs are allocated based on card holders. So how many card holders are in Foothills County and how many card holders are in the town of Okotoks? And then there's a difference between the Marigold Library requisition rates. That's factored into it as well. So if one rate's higher than the other, that's factored into the calculation. Costs included are detailed again in a calculation schedule, and they include library requisition as well as capital debt interest and amortization costs. As well, the county is to be provided the opportunity to provide input into any capital decisions greater than $100,000. And the county also has the option to negotiate any capital. There's also grant provisions similar to what we had talked about with fire. Next one is recreation. And recreation cost for has a specific list of facilities that are covered, and the Aquatic Center, Marie Piper, Centennial Arenas, the Recreation Center common areas, as well as the curling rink and the Scott Seaman Sports Rink. It does not include other recreation facilities other than those specified in the agreement. Eligible costs include client services, direct program cost, capital debt interest, as well as amortization. Exclusions. Recreation-related revenues are deducted from the eligible costs, and it's the net amount that the ratio is applied to, and the ratio is the number of users in the program, recreation programs, calculated out by ratio of how many are from Foothills County compared to how many are from the town of Okotoks. Again, specific grants are shared, general grants are not shared. There's input into capital of greater than 100,000, and as well, Schedule B details the list of operating costs. Next up is recycling. This is cost sharing uses average percentages from fire, library, and rec. So fire, library, and rec have their own particular way of calculating out the ratio. Then the average of those ratios is applied to the next services, the next two services, which is recycling and cemetery. It's applied to the costs for recycling, and that's how the amount is calculated. The costs included are operating costs, specific capital costs are included, as well as the grant provisions are similar as well. And again, there's a calculation template for recycling in Schedule B. Finally, also included is cemetery services, and they have the same provisions as with recycling, so I won't reiterate those again. Again, Schedule B contains a template. So on a going forward basis, Bill 50 had many provisions that significantly impacted municipalities, one of which it changed the intermunicipal collaboration framework, and the current agreement with some modifications actually could act as at least a starting point for an ICF for Okotoks and Foothills County to meet the regulatory requirements if that's what's so desired by our two councils. At the very least, it's a strong starting point, and the principles contained in our agreement and that have stood the test of time can actually put us in a good position and would continue to do so as we collaborate into the future and meet any other regulatory requirements that come down the pipe and continue to evolve. That concludes my presentation, and I'd welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through the chair to administration. If we can just go back to slide 13, just trying to understand the grants, capital grants over 100,000. So I just need a little bit more clarity with that. I'm reading it, but it's not making, so grants, capital grants over 100,000 credited to county over assets useful life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What does that mean?
Through the chair to Councillor McHugh, my understanding in the agreement that is there, in this case with recycling, if there is a grant related to capital, just like we amortize the cost of the asset that the grant was used to acquire, we amortize the cost of the asset over the life. This is amortizing the grant over the same life. So we're matching the revenue stream with the cost of the asset stream each year.
So what does that, does that mean the county just gets the grant and that Okotoks doesn't get a grant? Where'd this $100,000 grant come from? Just capital grants, capital.
It's just talking about, so with the grants, it's just saying that how a grant would be applied. So if Foothills County was to go and get a grant for $250,000, my math will be really bad here, but $250,000 to buy an asset that exists for 10 years, I'll do quick math, $25,000 of that would be applied to the contract per year, is the general gist of that. So that grant would be reduced off of whoever's share for that year based on the lifespan of the asset we just bought, instead of the whole full $250,000 being applied in year one. Is that a good non-financial summary? Oh, I was so close. Oh, good.
Through the chair to the floor, very, very close. Because the last part of that sentence is based on the current cost share ratio. So there would be the asset was $250,000 and the grant was $250,000. However, Foothill County's cost sharing in recycling is 20%. So you would get charged 20% of the amortization of the $250,000 asset. You would also be credited with 20% of the $250,000 grant amortized over the life of the asset.
Clear as mud, Councillor?
Yeah. It's essentially at the end of the day, it's just trying to match the amount of applicable revenue to the amount of applicable cost that Foothills County is being charged for. So basically it's wiping out the amortization cost to the degree that there was a grant that paid for it.
But this is all assuming we get grants. So
Well, I guess that's the part I don't understand it, because this is only referring to the municipality. It's not referring to the town of Okotoks. So does Foothills get capital grants that town of Okotoks doesn't get? Like that?
this is referring to any grant, regardless of which one of us gets it. Is that the cost sharing agreement is regardless of who gets that grant.
Okay, well, that's.
Is my understanding.
The slides
Like
just refer to the.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
To Foothills. It doesn't refer to town of Okotoks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the specific.
I'm going to
agreement
go to
parameters.
CAO Payne. That's going to correct what I just said, probably. Yeah.
No, I'm not going to correct anybody. It is on, okay. However, the agreement is reciprocal. So because Scott Siemens Sports Rink is also included in the agreement, in the event that the county got a grant in excess of $100,000, the same rule would apply to the town's proportionate share of the amortization cost of that asset over the course of its useful life, whatever that is according to the agreement. I believe there's another section on grants that speaks to the type of grant, and if it's type of grant that could be applied to other things. So the old MSI or LGFF is the new term. If that is something that could apply to something else, in that instance, it doesn't get credited under the framework of this agreement. But it's, yeah, those are all sort of technical aspects. There is a requirement that the CAOs every fall, winter bring back an annual report to the committee as well. So that would likely be something we'll be adding to the next agenda for the IMC, is to look at the actual numbers. And from there, you'll see exactly how this agreement and its framework applies to our cost sharing on each of the different service areas that were presented today.
Anybody else have any questions? Reeve Seward.
Thank you. Just in relation to fire stations. So or fire services, you said fire station rental income is split as per ownership. What are we renting out? Is that a regular thing or just?
Through the chair to Reeve Seward. I believe that it was the recreation, but let me just double check my notes as far as
No,
the.
I think it's the fire station and it relates to Station 1 and we rent bays to AHS. And so because we
Yes.
own in that, we share the rental income from the AHS rental.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Mayor Thorne.
Anybody else? No. Yes, Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I got it. So the purpose of this grants, capital grants over $100,000 is basically so that whatever municipality gets the grant, that those residents receive the benefit of those grants exclusively by having it netted over a time period.
No, I don't think that's correct either.
So
Ultimately, the non-financial interpretation, this is my non-financial interpretation, is the reason that we have grants included in the master shared services agreement is because we know there's grants available to be applied for, regardless of which asset we've got. But any of the things that are in our master shared agreement is if we go out and we get a grant that's large enough to make a difference, we're making sure that that grant gets shared based on whatever ratio applies to that particular one. So recreation, we've got a amount of utilization that occurs is the breakdown. The grant is going to be shared in that regard, but it's spread over the course of, in particularly related to capital, it's spread over the course of the useful life of the asset so that we don't receive the grant all in year one, as an example, at $250,000. If it's a 10-year asset, it's $25,000 would come into that ratio to be calculated out for that particular year based on our cost sharing. It's just making sure that the grant that we get matches the life cycle of the asset we're buying from a financial accounting perspective. Am I getting close? I'm getting closer.
Through the chair to the floor, that's correct. Otherwise, if you have a $250,000 grant, you bought a $250,000 asset that's going to be amortized over 10 years. In our calculations, if you didn't have the provision for splitting out the grant, then you would get a credit coming off of your costs of the whole $250,000 of the grant. And so you pay a littler amount in year one. But in the next 9 years, you'd be charged $25,000 a year, but you wouldn't have any revenue to offset. So you'd be paying higher fees or cost share in the next 9 years.
I'm seeing some nods, Councillor McHugh.
Sorry, and through the chair to the floor, it used to be that we expensed our assets. Right. So in the year we bought the asset, we got the grant, it was zero in that year, pretty straightforward. We could do the calculation. But then the rules changed and said you can no longer expense your capital assets. You actually have to expense them over their useful life. So this change was just made so that we actually match the revenue with the expense for the purposes of calculations.
Any other questions on the master shared services agreement? Just one from me. So there's just a comment in the report that this kind of potentially creates the framework for the ICFs. When is the deadline that was provided to us to have the ICFs completed? Was it 2027? November 30th of 2027. Okay. Okay. So would the intent be, and recognizing I think there's a few pieces of work that we would talk about the ICF here, particularly after Foothills County walks their way through their MDP, because I know there's so many things that are layering on top of that. So I just would like to understand a little bit, like we've got I think an agreement that served us well for sure for the last 14 years. Not saying it won't serve us well for the next 14, but where in our IMC discussion is it that we actually are going to talk about, do we have everything in the agreement that should be in the agreement? Should we be looking at different formulas that are there, and revamping it in any way, shape, or form based on that whole regional piece? Maybe I'm asking the wrong question, but that's the general gist of the question. And I'm not sure who I'm asking it to, but I'm looking at that CAO table over there.
Thank you for the question, Mayor Thorne. I think philosophically what we're talking about here is the fact that we have the Master Shared Services Agreement. We have mandated legislation that says by November 30th, 2027, we have to have an ICF. That ICF has components that will require us to change our Master Shared Services Agreement. So we have to develop a strategy. So for example, the ICF doesn't allow for libraries to be included, but libraries are a component of our Master Shared Services Agreement. So we're going to have to be able to go through the Master Shared Services Agreement, determine what makes sense, what has to be removed for legal compliance, and then come back with draft components there for the recommendations. So CAO Payne and myself have to have that in our work plan and develop a work strategy to bring that forward, and we'll be going forward to do that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor McHugh. You said the last one was the last one, Councillor McHugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the church administration. So I'm trying to figure out where, I find it interesting, the comment from CEO Vincent that libraries are going to come out, and we've been speaking about regional partnerships and whatnot. I believe Councillor Lang sits on West Winds, but so we had services, we have the 5 that we do share, but I'm just thinking about seniors housings and specifically West Winds. That is, I'm just thinking the interrelation between, well, we have interrelations with Okotoks and Foothills on West Winds, but is that an area that might be explored through ICFs in the future, is how we're dealing with the West Winds components of Master Shared Services Agreement CAO Vincent?
That's my sense as well. Thank you, Councillor McHugh. Man, I wish provincial legislation was easy. My quick overall thought is West Winds is covered under the Alberta Housing Act and not municipal affairs. And so combining that under the cost sharing agreement may prove to be difficult. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have common philosophies adopted by West Winds that we agree to operate under, and that could be done, but actually covering a Housing Act scenario under our cost sharing agreement may not be in compliance with the Act. We'd have to take a look at that.
And just, I guess, further that, so from an ICF perspective, there's been a legal ruling that libraries are not included in an ICF, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to have the Master Shared Services Agreement that includes libraries. So it's how we choose to structure all of it and which elements get named where and what. So no different than we've got other joint agreements on operating on a variety of things. 4 is being an example, the field house. The library potentially would be another one of those standalone potentially ones, just because we can't put it under something we label as an ICF, because the province has ruled that libraries can't be included in an ICF, if that makes sense, correct? CAO Payne?
Yeah, and just from Foothills County's perspective, we've got a number of these agreements now, so we've tried to do it in an equitable way so that all of our municipalities that we're partnering with are treated the same, use the same philosophy, use the same criteria in terms of determining how the cost share will work for each of the different service areas. And just to clarify for the committee, Bill 50 is the bill that changed legislation around ICFs and what's required, and it's got mandatory infrastructure that we've got to cover in our ICFs. And then libraries is one of the ones that is no longer actually allowed legally within an ICF, within an intermunicipal collaborative framework. And what they refer to actually in the bill is third-party services. So the library is considered a third-party service. Actually, I think West Winds would also be considered that. So I don't think it would be legal to include it in an ICF as a framework. Our most recent negotiated agreement is now with Diamond Valley, and that acts as our ICF with Diamond Valley. We were under a different timeline with Diamond Valley because they were not a CMRB member formally. So we actually had a earlier timeline with Diamond Valley, but then they went through amalgamation and timelines were stretched by the province to allow us extra time to negotiate that framework. And I can just share with the committee, that framework is very, very similar to the agreement that we have with Okotoks. Notwithstanding, it does not include libraries. Libraries are something that would be dealt with separately through an MOU or some other form of agreement if we decide that that's a service that we both wish jointly to share in.
Okay, any other questions on this? Seeing none, the motion is to receive this report as information. Would anybody like to make that motion? Councillor Dykma, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, thanks.
Anybody else? With that, calling the question, all in favor? All opposed? Okay. That carries. Moving to 4.6, land options at the regional field house. And we will bring out Foothills County Parks and Rec Manager Jeff Porter to present on this item.
Hello again. I'm here to make it a little easier on you, I hope, than the last go around here. Before IMC and that today was I guess to back up, IMC has seen this item before. IMC reviewed this item in regards to the land use options for the regional field house and put it back to the Foothills Okotoks Recreation Society Board to get their recommendations to bring back to IMC. So at this point, I'm doing that. Contained in your package is the report that was presented to IMC before and also went to the Foothills Okotoks Recreation Society. In a synopsis, and that with taking it back to Foothills Okotoks Recreation Society, the board largely agreed with the recommendations that the playing fields, diamonds and rectangular fields would be the best fit to maximize utilization of the existing facility. There's good discussion around the idea of artificial turf and the potential to dome the fields for year-round usage. When it comes to the order of baseball diamond development versus rectangular field development, the board felt it was wise to explore this further with the community engagement piece. As we get closer to the time frame for the site development, this should help us to better understand the community's preferences and priorities, as obviously these will change over time as different sports ebb and flow. Some board members did express concerns about the capital spent and operating costs associated with expanding the facility. Board expressed interest in the potential for public-private partnership to help facilitate the advancement of the project financially. So with that, the board made the recommendation and that to IMC that they acknowledge the discussion regarding land use optics and at a later date would make a decision in regards to the usage of the fields. So with that, they're receptive to the advancement of development outside of the current field house on the lands. They also made a recommendation that an annual contribution be explored for the capital reserve fund from each owner, contributing $20,000 annually. So for future viability of the field house, and we've had a substantial drawdown of our capital reserve at this point in time due to the artificial turf replacement. We do have a CFIP grant that was applied for by the board and New Stadia. We're waiting to hear that. We believe we're in the final stages of that grant process. The province came back to us and asked for additional information and letters of support. So we've provided those, and we hope to hear in January, and that as to the results of that funding application. If we're unsuccessful in obtaining that application, then obviously we've already taken out of our capital reserve, and that to pay for the turf that would not be replenished. So that is the reasoning for the recommendation to IMC and then to the respective councils in regards to a $20,000 annual contribution from each member to buoy up that capital reserve fund. If there's any questions, I'd take those at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. Any questions from anybody on this? I guess I have a question on the $20,000 for reserve funds. But the fact that this is a jointly operated and funded facility, why is there a need for us to take reserve money from this pot to put it into this pot? When at the end of the day, it's these pots over here that are paying for whatever we're going to do capital wise over here. So I don't understand the logic of why we would want to do a capital transfer to Force.
Thank you for the question through the chair to the floor. One of the reasons why, and then I mean financially, I guess you're definitely correct in that it comes out of the same pot. By the $20,000 annual contribution, and that by each owner, what it would do is if at a point in time, let's say we had to replace a rooftop unit or something like that, let's say it costs $1 million to do that. I mean, it's not what it's going to cost, but let's say it's $1 million just for discussion's sake. At that point in time, it'd be a $500,000 cash call to each municipality. So it would help buffer that to each municipality as far as financial impact for unplanned events. Also for planned events, and that it would help in the maintenance cycle to soften the blow in regards to municipalities, because obviously that facility is starting to age. I believe we're 13 years now into the facility's lifespan. We're going to start we've been lucky to this point, not many costs associated with the facility. Those are obviously going to pick up as the facility ages. I am happy to report though that the board did accept a proposal in that by a firm in regards to building sponsorship. The details are yet to be finalized and worked out, but that will help substantially in that towards the overall costs of operation of the building and help us financially. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And just one supplemental question then to that is the field house, I know with the town of Okotoks, we have an asset management program. Does the field house fall into our asset management program, and does the county have the same asset management program in terms of managing it through its life cycle, where we're again back, I know for us we were managing our full asset management, but that money would be in theory, I will say, saved for those situations, but I just trying to understand how we asset manage and plan for that life cycle maintenance on the facility as two municipalities. maybe I'll go to CAO Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I believe the asset sits on our books the same. I would just mention that when the field house was constructed, there was a fundraising society at the time that had done some initial fundraising for the facility. And when our agreement was set up with New Stadia, who's the operator for that field house, we set up an agreement where any naming rights for the fields or for the building itself go into a capital reserve. And those are reserved for use by the two municipalities only. So the society doesn't necessarily have access to those funds unless the municipalities agree to it. And those funds were intended to create an ongoing sustainable pot of funding to maintain things like the turf replacement that's taking place right now. So that turf is over 10 years old. It's reached its end of life and it'll be switched out and it'll be funded actually by the reserves that are sitting there as a result of fundraising donations. I'm not sure I would recommend to this committee that we start setting aside funds right now for something that's not planned or supported by both communities. So just to clarify, this is a recommendation not from staff, but from the report that the consultant provided. Certainly something that could be considered in the future, but I think maybe a better use of money and time is dealing with something outdoors in terms of future development at that site when the two communities agree at this table that there's a project to be done. I'd have a hard time recommending to the committee that we start each setting aside $20,000 for something that's not necessarily planned at this point in time. That's not to say that the not-for-profit society can't to establish some additional plans in and around the field house, utilizing some of those other revenue resources that I mentioned from fundraising, building, naming rights, those types of things. But just some food for thought. And I don't know whether you agree. Elaine agrees. Okay. So.
Thank you very much, CAO Payne. I have Councillor Dagma and then Seward. So go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just for clarity's sake, so right now we don't have any like ongoing reserve that contribution-wise on an annual basis.
There's the fund was utilized or fully utilized in that pretty much in that with the purchasing of the turf. So with it being depleted and that now we're looking to build it back up. So the board and that's why they made the recommendation IMC in regards to helping to top that up. Now with the aforementioned naming rights of the building and that once that's secured, that will help starting to build that fund up. Otherwise, in that field naming rights, that sort of thing, there is some revenue that comes in regards to that, but it's really minimal in that an overall scheme of things in that regards to the costs that potentially face the facility. So yes, and that there is fundraising efforts taking place in that by New Stadia and that for the site. That being said, they've been fairly unsuccessful over the last years. In the last year, it has picked up in regards to their being able to get sponsorship. As you know, if you've been out trying to get donations or any sponsorships in public, it's getting harder and harder. Businesses and corporations have retracted to their core business and that, and as far as their community outreach and that, they've really cut back. And some of the local institutions in that are nationally owned and that now have gone to a national application process versus just being able to go down to your local, say BMO branch or United Farmers Association and that cooperative. So yeah, it's hard for this society and that to raise the kind of funds that we're going to need in the future for replacement of facilities. We have multi-sport surface that's going to need replacing here in probably the next 3 to 5 years. So.
And then just secondary question to that. So in terms, I get it in terms of the, let's say the turf, but if we look at like critical infrastructure, if we're looking at like boilers, HVAC, that kind of thing, do we have any reserves or would those be a cash call at time of replacement?
Thank you for the question through the chair of the floor. Those are to some extent captured in the annual operating budget in regards to the facility. As far as if there would be to be multiple failures, whether we'd be able to capture that and cover it in the normal operating budget, they would probably have to get creative, and we may have to come with a cash call to the owners. Thank you.
Reeve Seward.
Thanks. So yeah, just speaking to that $20,000 question, that came because there has not been any naming of the building sponsorship over this past year. The contract with Cavalry FC expired on December 31st, almost a year ago. So it's been almost a year now without any naming sponsorship. And over that time, it's no longer been called the Cavalry FC Fieldhouse or the, what was the name before that? It was an energy company anyways. Over the past year now, it's been called the Foothills Okotoks Fieldhouse, which it always was, but it's now, it's, you know, the sponsorship, the name rights, that sort of thing, whatever has transferred to that. So the request, from what I understand, was not a continual 20,000. It was just a 1 year because of the loss of a naming sponsor this year. So, and if I'm wrong, Mr. Lang, please correct me, but that was my understanding. Where was I going with that? In terms of capital, correct me if I'm wrong, we have around thought set aside yet. So there is a nest egg there, but certainly not enough for just catastrophic by any stretch. So I guess where I was going more, I'm just looking at the motion here, suggested motion. The second half of the joint committee be directed to establish placeholders in each municipality's capital budgets. So this is not speaking to that 20,000. That's something totally separate. I'm not sure what we would be placing aside because I don't think anything has been specifically named. From Foothills' perspective, I don't know that we have any calls for more development or anything. And if I recall, I didn't anything specific they were looking for. So I guess perhaps the best way to get it, the answer would be, did Okotoks put placeholders in their budget for the field house? Okay.
At the moment, there isn't. No. And there is a spot in the report, the last page of our 724 pages, the very last page at the top does have a recommendation for inclusion in the master shared services agreement. I don't know if that's the capital budget, but I'm assuming that came from committee for the years of the capital budget placement. So ball diamonds, supporting amenities, an artificial turf, and an air supported dome. So that's how I interpreted that was what was the recommendation, but that might have been a broad interpretation on my part. Councillor Lang, I know Reeve Seawart's going to just have a look at that. Did you want to add anything to the Reeve's comments?
Reeve Sieverts is right, because the way I understood the presentation was it was a one-time $20,000 from each owner to make up for the lost revenues from not having a title sponsor. So that's where that came from. So I agree. I didn't think it was an ongoing, it was just a one-time deal. Thank you.
Councillor, I keep wanting to make you a councillor. I don't know if that's an upgrade or a downgrade. I'm not really sure. So we'll just leave it at that. CAO Payne.
Yeah, and I might just, because there's some new members, add a little bit of context to the question that Councillor Dykema asked earlier about capital planning and the field house and how that's done. Under the operating agreement that we have in place with New Stadia Recreation, there's a requirement that they maintain a current and up-to-date capital replacement plan. So they actually break out every single asset within that facility. Professional engineer goes through and establishes a useful life cycle for each of those items. And then the idea is that this capital reserve is intended to be adequate to cover the cost of the things that are coming down the pipe for replacement. It's at that 10+ year age now, so things will start to cost a little bit more to replace them as they fall apart. There's a couple of areas where the municipalities are already providing funding though to that facility as well. Any operating deficit is covered 50-50 by the county and by the town jointly. And proactively upfront, New Stadia Recreation identifies through their budget our capital requisitions and our operating requisitions from the town and from the county. I believe they've also got a stabilization fund that was put in place by a policy of the Foothills Okotoks Recreation Society during the COVID period. And that was intended to be another sort of separate reserve that would cover any operating shortfall that might have occurred during that period of time. The members would know whether that's still being collected. I don't know that detail, whether it is. But if it is, that's another area where you could redirect some funds that are already being provided by the municipalities to capital replacement programming if that's needed. So there's a number of sources there. Not necessarily need that I can think of to provide funding immediately from either municipality. And given Okotoks hasn't put anything in their budget for that at this point in time, maybe it's a moot point. I don't know.
I don't know where to go next. Reeves, Seward.
Are you ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion, absolutely.
Okay, I would give you a motion that the land development options for the Fieldhouse report regarding land development priorities be received as information as presented. And that the request from Forez regarding $20,000 contributions be referred to each municipality.
Okay, speaking to your Ms. George, do you have that? Madly typing.
Certainly, that the land development options for the regional Fieldhouse report regarding land development priorities be received as information as presented, and that the request from the Foothills Okotoks Recreation Society for a $20,000 capital reserve contribution be referred to each municipality.
Okay, speaking to your motion.
No.
No. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Any comments? Calling that question then, all in favor? Not sure I am in favor, but I'm going to go that way. Okay, that carries unanimously. So that takes us out of, do we need to deal with the second part of that motion, or that joint administrations be directed to establish placeholders in each municipality's capital budgets in alignment to support future site development? Or are we good at the moment that we actually need to do some CEO Payne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that's dealt with in the new motion that Reeves Siebert had put forward, just regarding the referral to the county and to the town to take a look at the requisition request.
Okay, great. Thank you. That brings us to closed session. So I will need a motion to go into closed session. We have one item that qualifies under the Access to Information Act. So I've got Councillor Lang, all in favor? Carries unanimously.